The borrowed pearls were too tight. Ilara Voss pressed 2 fingers to her throat, feeling the clasp dig into the back of her neck, and told herself it was nothing. It was not nothing. She had been standing in the entrance hall of Bradmore House for 4 minutes, and Lord Ashwick had already appeared at her left shoulder as though he had been waiting there since morning. He probably had been. Miss Voss, he said her name the way a man says the name of something he already considers his, not unkindly, just with a certainty that had no business being there. You look well. Thank you, my lord. She kept her eyes on the room ahead. Candlelight spread across 200 people she mostly did not know, bouncing off diamonds and glasses, and the polished floors of a ballroom that cost more to clean each week than her family spent on coal in a winter. Ashwick offered his arm. She took it because refusing would have required an explanation, and she did not have one ready. That was the problem with Ashwick she had found over the past 3 weeks. He moved in a way that made refusal feel rude, made distance feel dramatic, made the most ordinary boundary feel like an accusation. She was forever arriving at the moment of protest 1 breath too late. Her father had introduced them at the Whitmore dinner. Her father had used the word promising. Her father had not asked her what she thought. Her father never asked her what she thought, which was either a failing of his personality or a logical response to the fact that she never told him. She was 22 years old, and she had been managing her own silence for most of them. Ashwick steered her toward a group near the tall windows, people she had met twice and remembered poorly. He made conversation easily, the kind of conversation that filled a room without adding anything to it. She smiled when the rhythm called for it. She laughed once lightly at something she had not actually heard. Then she looked across the room. Edmund Carew was standing near the far wall with a glass he was not drinking from, wearing an expression that was not quite boredom and not quite attention, but something efficiently between the two. He was tall in a way that was not remarkable until you stood beside him and realized the ceiling felt lower. He had dark hair that needed cutting, though no one would say so to his face, and the face itself was the kind that took some people years to understand as handsome because it did not perform handsomeness. It simply sat there, exact and unhurried. He was the Duke of Harwick. He was also Cora Carew's older brother. He was also, and this was the part Ilara did not let herself think about for longer than 3 consecutive seconds, the reason she had not been able to seriously consider any other man for 3 years. He looked across the room. Their eyes met. He nodded once, the nod of someone acknowledging a known quantity, then he looked away. She breathed in through her nose and looked back at Ashwick. I believe, Ashwick was saying, that Lord Pemberton has finally settled the business with his northern estate. Took the man long enough. Yes, she said with authority, having no idea what business or which estate. You've met Pemberton, I think. Briefly. Good man, steady. He glanced at her sideways. I value steady people. It was an ordinary thing to say. The way he said it was not quite ordinary. It had the texture of a point being made, though she could not have told a judge exactly what the point was. That was another thing about Ashwick. He said things that sat in the stomach slightly wrong, like a meal that looked perfectly fine on the plate. She managed the next 20 minutes by counting things. The number of women in blue, 14. The number of men whose cravats were tied badly, 3. The number of times Ashwick touched her arm while making a point, 5. 5 was too many. She had not yet found a way to say so. Her friend Cora appeared at 9 o'clock, threading through the crowd with her usual neat efficiency, red hair catching the light, and arrived at Ilara's side with the precision of someone executing a plan. Miss Voss, she kissed her cheek. You look magnificent, my lord. A perfectly calibrated nod to Ashwick containing respect and absolutely nothing warmer. Miss Carew, Ashwick smiled at her. Cora smiled back. They had met 3 times. They disliked each other thoroughly and managed it beautifully. I need to steal her for a moment, Cora said. Female emergency, you understand. Ashwick had no choice but to understand. He bowed. Ilara followed Cora toward the side of the room with a gratitude so large she was afraid it showed on her face. Female emergency, she murmured. I needed to get you away from him without starting a scene, Cora said. You looked like someone being slowly pressed between 2 books. Ilara did not deny it. They found a spot near a potted palm that was large enough to provide cover and claimed it. Cora produced a fan from somewhere and deployed it with the efficiency of someone who had been using fans as social tools for years. How bad is it? Cora asked. It is not bad, Elara paused. It is uncomfortable in a way I cannot explain without sounding dramatic. Dry. He has never said anything wrong, he has never done anything wrong, he is perfectly courteous, she stopped. The palm frond above her stirred in the warmth of the room. He stands too close, and he says things that feel like decisions I haven't made yet. Cora looked at her for a moment. Your father likes him. Yes. Your father also chose the wallpaper in your dining room, and I have seen that wallpaper, Elara. A laugh came out of her, sudden and genuine. That is not a fair comparison. It is absolutely a fair comparison. Both choices were made without your input, and both are going to be very difficult to live with. Cora closed her fan and tapped it against her palm. What does your mother say? My mother says he comes from a good family. That is not the same as saying he is a good man. No, it is not. Elara looked across the room. Ashwick was now speaking with a man twice his age, laughing at something perfectly at ease. My father's situation is not strong. This season is not an accident. I understand the expectation. Cora was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for Cora. Then, carefully, understanding an expectation is not the same as accepting it. I know, she said it in a voice that meant she knew and had already had the argument with herself and lost, or won. She was not always sure which direction victory ran. My brother is here, Cora said in a tone that was almost entirely casual. Almost. I saw him. He asked about you actually, earlier today, asked whether you were coming tonight. Elara turned to look at her friend. Why? He didn't say why. He asked the way people ask about things they are thinking about without meaning to. Cora examined her fan. I may have told him about Ashwick. Cora. I told him very little, just that your father had introduced you and that the man seemed to be appearing rather consistently. That is all fact. I stated only facts. You stated facts in a tone. I always state facts in a tone. That is what tones are for. Elara pressed her lips together. Across the room, Edmund had been drawn into a conversation with two men she did not recognize. He was listening more than talking, which was his nature. Edmund Caro never spoke more than he needed to, and always seemed to have said exactly the right amount. She had catalogued his qualities the way other women catalogued silks. She knew it was something she should stop doing. She had been meaning to stop for 3 years. The first time she had understood what she felt, she had been 19 and sitting in the Caro library, reading a letter from her mother while Edmund sat across the room doing something with papers and account books. He had looked up at one point, caught her expression and said without preamble, "Bad news." She had said, "My uncle is unwell." He had said, "I'm sorry," and looked at her with an attention that was not curiosity and not pity but something steadier than either, something that felt like being actually seen rather than observed. Then he had gone back to his papers, and she had gone back to her letter, and something had shifted in her so quietly she almost missed it. She had not missed it. 3 years was a long time to carry something quietly. She had gotten very good at it. Ashwick appeared again at her shoulder. She was beginning to think he could find her by sound alone. Miss Caro, he acknowledged Cora. I hope I'm not interrupting. We were just finishing, Cora said pleasantly with eyes that said no such thing. Elara took his offered arm again because the alternative was making a scene, and she was not ready to make a scene. Scenes required certainty, and certainty required being willing to explain herself, and explaining herself meant saying out loud the thing she had not said to anyone except, in the very quiet of her own room, the ceiling above her bed. That she did not want this man. That she wanted a different man who had never thought of her that way, who saw her as his sister's friend and nothing more, who nodded at her across ballrooms with the same expression he used for furniture he liked. That the choice she was being walked toward by everyone who loved her and several people who did not know her at all was a cage she was helping to build herself, one polite conversation at a time. Ashwick said something about the music. She agreed with it. They moved toward the supper room. She did not look back across the ballroom. Or rather, she did, just once quickly. Edmund was still standing by the far wall. He was watching the room in general. He was not watching her specifically. Of course he was not. The pearls pressed into her throat the whole way across the floor, and she lifted her chin and kept walking and told herself that this was fine, that she was fine, that this was simply what life asked of women who understood the situation they were in. She was very good at believing that. For about 4 minutes at a time. Then she would catch sight of something, a man's dark hair in a crowd, a voice at a certain low register, a certain quality of attention in a room, and the 4 minutes would reset. Ashwick held the door of the supper room open for her. She walked through it. The door swung shut behind them with a soft sound that was, she thought, a great deal quieter than it should have been. She sat where he indicated. She accepted a plate she would not finish. She smiled at the woman across the table who made a joke she half heard. She was very good at this. She had been very good at this for a very long time. And somewhere on the other side of that door, in a ballroom full of candles and noise, and 200 people going about the ordinary business of their ambitions, Edmund Caro stood by his wall and looked at the room he was in and thought about nothing in particular. Or so she assumed. She was wrong about that, but she would not know it for several weeks, and by then a great deal would have changed. For now she sat across from Ashwick and ate nothing and smiled with her mouth and thought about borrowed pearls, and how tight they were, and how that was the sort of thing you were supposed to get used to. She had not gotten used to it yet. She was beginning to suspect she never would. Edmund Caro did not like Lord Ashwick. He had established this fact before the Bradmore ball had reached its midpoint, and he spent the walk home that night quietly turning it over, examining it from different angles the way you examine a stone you have stepped on in the dark, trying to determine whether it cut you. He had no history with Ashwick, no debt, no grievance, no particular memory that justified the specific quality of discomfort he felt when the man appeared at Alara Voss's shoulder with that possessive ease, that assumption of welcome. It was the ease that was the problem. A man who moved that smoothly in the direction of a woman who was not yet his had either very good manners or very bad intentions, and in Edmund's experience the two were rarely the same thing. He had sat with his sister Cora in the carriage after, and said nothing about it. Cora had not said anything either, which meant she was waiting for him to go first. He had not gone first. He had looked out the window at the London streets going dark and thought about something else, or tried to. The next morning he was at his desk by 7, which was normal for him. He handled correspondence before breakfast, before the house fully woke in the hour when the light was thin and blew through the study windows, and the city outside had not yet committed to being loud. He liked that hour. It asked nothing of him. He was 3 letters in when he found himself thinking, without meaning to, about the way Alara had looked across the room at him before looking away. He set down his pen. She had always been a composed person, which he had noted the first time he met her, when she was 17 and had arrived at Caro House with Cora after their first term and had walked through the front door already looking as though she had grown up in it. Not arrogantly, simply without the anxious adjusting that most people did in unfamiliar houses. She had looked at the hallway, decided it was fine, and moved into it without hesitation. He had thought, there is someone who takes stock of things quietly. He had then gone back to whatever he had been doing, because she was 17 and his sister's friend, and he was 24, and had approximately 40 things requiring his attention at any given moment. But he had noticed, over the following years he had noticed, in the way he noticed weather or the condition of roads or other things that were useful to be aware of. He noticed that she was intelligent in a way she did not make a performance of. He noticed that her humor was dry and arrived without announcement, and was funnier for that reason. He noticed that she never asked him questions about himself, which in a world full of people asking him questions about himself was a quality of almost physical relief. She asked him questions about ideas instead. What did he think about the new land reform proposals? Had he read the Pemberton essay on agricultural drainage? Did he believe that London in 20 years would look anything like London now? He always answered, he usually had opinions. He found, somewhat to his surprise, that he looked forward to her having them too. None of this was anything. He had told himself this clearly and without drama. She was Cora's friend. She was 8 years younger. She was a young woman navigating her first seasons in a world that would be perfectly happy to turn her into furniture if she gave it the chance. He was a duke with a title and an estate, and a list of responsibilities that started with his tenants and ended somewhere around the 4th cousin who kept writing letters requesting loans. There was no version of this that was anything. He picked up his pen, he wrote the next letter. He was halfway through the one after that when Cora appeared in the doorway of the study in her dressing gown, which meant she had been up early and thinking, which meant she had something to say. "You're going to say something about last night," he said without looking up. "I'm having breakfast first." She sat down in the chair across from his desk with a cup of tea and the expression of someone being very patient. "Lord Ashwick." "I have no opinion about Lord Ashwick." "You had a face about Lord Ashwick for approximately the entire second half of the evening." "I have only one face." "Edmund," she said it gently, which was worse than when she said it sharply, "what do you know about him?" He set down the pen again. Through the window, the city was beginning to come alive, carts and voices and the sound of the street reorganizing itself into its daytime noise. "He has presented himself 3 times in the past 8 days, he said. "At events where Alara is present. He has not been reported at events where she is not." Cora was looking at him. "That is publicly available information," he said. "Social calendars, Cora, anyone with eyes could observe it." "Most people with eyes have not bothered to." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "What else?" He had looked. He had not specifically meant to look, but he had spoken to his solicitor about something unrelated 2 days ago, and the solicitor had mentioned, in passing, that a colleague's client had recently concluded a difficult financial negotiation involving a Lord Ashwick of Hertfordshire. He had not asked for more details. He had noted that the word difficult had been used. "Nothing concrete," he said. "But." "There is no but. Edmund." He looked at his sister. She was 20 years old and had been able to read him since she was approximately 4, which was either a gift or a liability depending on the day. Today it was a liability. "I don't like the way he positions himself," he said finally. "He doesn't ask for space, he assumes it. There is a difference between a man who is confident and a man who moves through a room as though its occupants have already agreed to things they haven't agreed to." Cora was quiet for a moment. Outside, a cart horse's hooves rang on the cobblestones, steady and patient. "She won't say anything," Cora said. "If he oversteps, she won't raise a scene." "I know that. Not because she's weak, because her family situation makes it complicated." He did know this. He knew the broad shape of it. A father with a fondness for expensive things and a corresponding shortfall in the resources to fund them. Alara had never said any of this directly. But she had a way, when the subject of her family came up, of going carefully neutral, the way a person does when they have practiced not betraying something. "She is managing it," he said. "She is managing it alone." Cora put down her cup, "because she thinks it is hers to manage." He said nothing. "I told her you asked about her," Cora said, in a tone that was entirely too casual. He looked up. "Why?" "Because I wanted to see what she did." "And what did she do?" "She asked why you'd asked." Cora picked up her cup again, which is what someone asks when the answer matters to them. He was quiet for a long time. A log shifted in the fireplace. The light in the room had changed from blue to yellow while they talked. The morning fully arrived now, the thin, quiet hour gone. "She has enough to manage," he said. "Yes. She doesn't need me adding to the complexity." "No," a pause. "Although there is a version of this in which you are not a complexity, in which you are." "Cora, I am simply observing." "You are doing considerably more than observing." She smiled at him, the smile she had been deploying since childhood when she wanted him to know she was right and was choosing to be gracious about it. He had always found it profoundly irritating. "Go get dressed," he said, "and stop thinking whatever you are thinking." "I will go get dressed," she said, standing. "The other request is beyond my capabilities." She left. He sat in the study with his letters and the morning light and the sound of the city getting fully, irrevocably started, and he looked at the paper in front of him and thought about nothing in particular. Or rather, he thought about Alara Voss standing at the edge of the supper room doorway the previous evening, just before Ashwick had guided her through it, and the way her shoulders had been very straight, and the way that straightness had looked less like confidence and more like someone bracing for something they had already decided to endure. He picked up his pen, he wrote 2 more letters, he went to breakfast. He spoke with his estate manager about drainage on the North Field, and with his secretary about 3 upcoming obligations, and with his butler about a window in the east corridor that had been sticking since November. He did not think about Ilara Voss again until the afternoon, when Cora mentioned, over tea, that the Fortescue garden party was in 4 days, and that Ilara would be attending. "Will she?" he said. "And Ashwick, I expect," Cora said. "He seems to follow her calendar quite closely." Edmund considered this. He turned it over, he set it down. "Will you be going?" he asked. Cora looked at him with the expression of someone restraining triumph with great effort. "I had planned on it, yes." "I may accompany you," he said. "The Fortescues are old family friends." "Of course. That is the only reason." "Naturally." He looked at her. She looked at him. "The straightness of your face right now," he said, "is doing exactly what you want it to do." "I have no idea what you mean," Cora said, and poured him more tea. He accepted the tea. He said nothing else about it. There was nothing else to say because he had not decided anything, and he was not going to decide anything because there was nothing to decide. He was simply a man who had noted a situation that warranted attention. He was simply a man with good observational habits. He was simply going to a garden party because the Fortescues were old family friends, and the weather was expected to be pleasant, and he had no compelling reason not to. He told himself this clearly and efficiently for the next 4 days, each time the thought surfaced. He was fairly convincing. Not entirely, but fairly. And in the meantime, he called on his solicitor and asked, very casually, as a matter of general interest, whether the man had any further information about the financial situation of one Lord Ashwick of Hertfordshire. His solicitor had looked at him for a moment. Then his solicitor had said, "How much would you like to know?" "Enough," Edmund said, "to understand the situation accurately." His solicitor picked up a pen. Edmund sat back in the chair and listened, and the more he listened, the more the quiet thing in the back of his mind that had been carefully not becoming a feeling began, slowly and without his full permission, to become one. The Carew townhouse had a breakfast room that faced east, which meant that by 9 in the morning it was full of light, and by 9:15 it was full of Ilara Voss. She came on Tuesdays, always had, since the beginning of her first season, when Cora had established the Tuesday morning visit as a fact of their friendship, the way other facts were established, by simply beginning it and continuing until it was no longer possible to imagine the week without it. Ilara arrived on this particular Tuesday with her coat still damp at the shoulders from a light rain she had walked through, and with the expression of someone who had been managing their face carefully for the past several days and was slightly tired of it. Cora took one look at her and said, "Sit down and tell me everything." "There is nothing to tell." "Sit down anyway." She sat. The breakfast room was warm and smelled of tea and toast, and the morning light came through the windows at an angle that made everything look softly permanent, like a painting of a morning rather than an actual one. She took the cup Cora pressed into her hands and held it without drinking. "Ashwick called on Friday," she said. "Officially." "Officially enough, he came with my father's prior knowledge. They spoke for some time in the study before I was asked to join." She turned the cup in her hands. The porcelain was warm. "He brought flowers, large ones." "Large flowers are a form of statement." "Yes, they were very loud flowers." She finally drank. The tea was strong and good. "He was very pleasant. He asked about my reading. He said something complimentary about my opinion on the subject of gardens, which I expressed very mildly and briefly, but he treated it as though I had delivered an address." "Men who need to be impressive often do that," Cora said. "They take the smallest thing a woman offers and make it very large, so they can be seen giving it back." Ilara thought about this. That is exactly what it felt like. As though my words were being polished before being returned to me. "Did your father stay in the room?" "For most of it. He left once briefly." Cora was quiet for a moment. The light shifted as a cloud passed, and then the room was warm again. "And how did you feel when your father left?" she asked. Ilara set down the cup. Outside, someone on the street below called out to someone else, and the sounds mixed with the ordinary morning noise of a city going about its business. "I counted the books on the shelf behind Ashwick's left shoulder," she said. Cora's expression did not change, but something in it understood. 43, Ilara said. though 4 were probably decorative. The door to the breakfast room opened, and Edmund Kara walked in. He was wearing his everyday clothes, which on him meant something well-cut and quietly excellent, and he was carrying a newspaper, and he had clearly come from somewhere in the house rather than arriving from outside, because his coat was dry and his expression was the comfortable neutral of a man in his own home. He stopped when he saw Alara. "Miss Voss," he nodded, "I didn't realize you were here." "It's Tuesday," Cora said. "Yes." He moved to the sideboard and poured himself coffee. His back was to them, and he did it without hurry, with the ease of a man who was simply going about his morning and had made no decisions about anything. "Join us," Cora said. "I won't interrupt." "You won't sit down." He sat. He opened the newspaper and looked at it without, Alara suspected, reading it. She looked at the table. She could feel Cora being pleased about something across from her and was choosing not to look at it. "How is the estate?" she asked, because someone had to say something and she was good at saying things that were neutral and sensible. "The drainage question is improving." He turned a page. "The North Field held better through March than last year." "That's good news." "It is." He looked up briefly. "Did you walk through the rain?" She glanced at her sleeve, which was still slightly damp. "Yes, it was only light." "I could have had the carriage sent." "It is 10 minutes. 8, Cora said helpfully. "I've timed it." Neither of them responded to this. The newspaper turned another page. The tea cooled gently in front of Alara, and the morning went on the way mornings did when nobody was quite saying what they were thinking. "Ashwick called on Friday," Cora said, in a voice of pure information, looking at her own tea. Edmund stopped turning the page. He did not look up, did he? "Officially," Cora said, "with flowers." "Large ones," Alara added, because she had already said it once and it seemed relevant. Edmund put the paper down, not with force, just set it aside in the way of someone who has decided that whatever is in it can wait. He picked up his coffee cup and looked at it and said, in a voice that was entirely even, "I wasn't aware things had progressed to formal calls." "My father considers them progressed," Alara said. "And you?" She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee cup with the same attention he gave most things, thorough, unhurried, as though there was no result he was afraid of finding. "I consider them ongoing," she said carefully. "I have not agreed to anything." "But you haven't refused anything." It was said without accusation. It was just a statement which was worse. "No," she said, "I have not refused anything." He looked up then. Their eyes met over the table, over the toast and the teacups and the ordinary clutter of a breakfast that was pretending to be simple. "Ashwick's financial situation is not what he represents it to be," Edmund said. The room got very still. "What do you mean?" Alara asked. "I mean that his income is substantially less than what he implies in conversation." He said it the way he might discuss the drainage situation, clearly and without dramatics, as though it were a fact like any other. "He has obligations he is not meeting. He has been approaching families this season with a particular kind of interest." A pause. "Not all of those families received him favorably." She stared at him. "How do you know this?" "I asked," he said it simply. "I spoke to my solicitor. These things are discoverable if you ask the right questions." Silence. Cora was looking at the table, which meant she already knew and had been waiting for Alara to hear it from Edmund rather than from her, which meant this had been arranged, which meant Alara was going to have a conversation with Cora about that at a later date. "This is hearsay," Alara said. "Some of it." Edmund picked up his newspaper again. The gesture was so ordinary that it almost obscured what had just happened. "Most of it is documented." She breathed. She looked at the window. The light was still coming in, yellow and calm, indifferent to the particular thing sitting in her chest. "Documented." Ashwick had large flowers and a smooth manner and her father's warm regard, and documented financial difficulties he had not mentioned once in 3 weeks of very pleasant conversation. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Edmund turned a page. "Because you should know." "That is not an answer." He looked up again. His expression was the same as it always was, attentive, exact, not quite readable. "You are an intelligent woman who makes decisions based on information. I had information. I gave it to you." She held his gaze for a moment longer than she meant to. 3 seconds, 4. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, the same nod as across the ballroom, the nod of someone acknowledging a known quantity, and went back to the newspaper. Cora refilled Alara's tea without being asked. She did it smoothly, efficiently, with the air of someone who was absolutely not planning anything and whose face happened to be very neutral. The conversation moved to other things: a concert on Saturday, a book Cora had been reading, something about a mutual friend's new house in Kensington. Edmund contributed occasionally 3 or 4 words at a time, always exactly on point, like a man who had been listening to everything but only chose to surface for the parts worth surfacing for. Alara answered questions and asked them and laughed twice and felt, underneath all of it, the thing she had been managing for 3 weeks sitting differently inside her now. Not better, not resolved, just repositioned, turned to a new angle. He had found out about Ashwick because he had asked. He had asked because he had wanted to know. He had wanted to know because... She did not finish that sentence. She was very practiced at not finishing it. At 11, she stood and said she had to go, which was true, and thanked Cora for the tea, which was true, and said good morning to Edmund, who looked up from the paper and said good morning back with a completeness that meant he was not going to extend it further, which was also true to him. Cora walked her to the hall. At the door very quietly while the footman fetched her coat, Cora said, "He had his solicitor pull the documents yesterday, first thing in the morning." Alara put on her coat, she buttoned it, she adjusted her gloves. "I see," she said. "Do you?" Cora asked. She looked at her friend. Cora's expression held something careful and fond, the expression of someone who is close enough to a fire to feel it without being told it is warm. "I see," Alara said again in a different tone, and went out into the morning. The rain had stopped. The streets were wet and clean and the air smelled of it, that particular London morning smell of stone and water and something approaching freshness. She walked the 8 minutes home, or the 10, she had never actually timed it, and she thought about what it meant that he had found out first thing in the morning. She thought about what it meant that he had told her directly, without performing concern, without making her ask. She thought about the newspaper going down in a quiet way. She thought about 43 books on a shelf, and how she had counted them instead of feeling anything. She thought about borrowed pearls. By the time she reached her own front door, she had talked herself back to the understanding she had arrived at 3 years ago, the one she returned to reliably because it was true and because it protected her. He was Cora's brother. He was 8 years older. He was a duke, and she was a woman with a father whose debts were documented and a future that was practical and narrow. He had told her about Ashwick because she should know, because she was an intelligent woman who made decisions based on information. He had said exactly that. That was all. That was the complete, entire, accurate sum of it. She went inside, she took off her coat. She sat at her writing desk and stared at the wall for a while without writing anything. And then she wrote a letter to her aunt in Bath about nothing in particular. And then she sat in the garden for 20 minutes because the sun had come out, and she needed to be outside of the room she had been thinking in. In the Caro breakfast room, 11 blocks away, Edmund Caro folded his newspaper and set it aside. He finished his coffee. He looked at the chair where Alara had been sitting for the past 2 hours, which was now simply a chair with a slightly indented cushion and a teacup someone would clear away. He stood, he went back to his study. He had 7 letters still to answer and 2 appointments in the afternoon, and an estate that was not going to manage itself. He managed it. He managed all of it, efficiently and without complaint, for the rest of the day. He managed it so well that by evening, he had almost convinced himself that the morning had been perfectly ordinary. Almost. Not entirely. But almost. The Fortescue Garden Party was the kind of event that sounded pleasant in advance and delivered something more complicated in practice. The garden itself was beautiful, genuinely, an acre of green behind a Mayfair townhouse that had no business being that large, full of old roses and gravel paths, and the particular English afternoon light that came in at an angle and made everyone look slightly better than they were. The problem was not the garden. The problem was Ashwick, who had arrived 40 minutes before Alara and had clearly spent those 40 minutes placing himself. She saw it the moment she came through the gate with Cora. He was not exactly waiting for her. He was simply positioned in a way that made his being the first person she encountered feel inevitable, The way certain rooms are arranged, so you always end up at the fireplace whether you meant to or not. Miss Voss, he was warm, he was always warm. What a happy coincidence. It was not a coincidence. Both their names were on the same invitation list, which was accessible to anyone who cared to ask the Fortescue's social secretary. She smiled, because smiling was what the moment asked for, and walked with him toward the main gathering because the path went that way. The afternoon proceeded the way such afternoons did. There was champagne on trays and finger food on plates, and a great deal of conversation about things that were not what anyone was actually thinking. Cora had been collected almost immediately by an old school friend and had looked apologetically at Alara before being pulled away, and Alara had signaled with her eyes that it was fine, because it was fine, because she was fine. She was fine. She talked to Lady Pemberton about roses, about which Lady Pemberton knew a great deal and Alara knew enough. She talked to a young man whose name she immediately forgot about the theatre, a subject on which he had opinions and she had reservations. She ate 3 small sandwiches that were very good and one that was not. She tracked Ashwick in her peripheral vision the way you track weather, knowing it matters without wanting to look at it directly. At 3 o'clock he appeared beside her near the garden wall at the far end of the path, where the roses were thickest, and the noise of the main party was just far enough away that a conversation could happen without being easily overheard. She noticed this. She noticed it in the way she noticed the position of exits in unfamiliar rooms, not with alarm, with the careful registration of a woman who has learned to file these things. "There is something I wanted to speak with you about," he said, "while the occasion allows." "Of course," she said. Her voice was perfectly normal, she was proud of it. He talked for a few minutes about the season, about his family's estate in Hertfordshire, about his admiration for her father. All of it was pleasant and none of it was the point. She could feel the point coming the way you can feel a change in temperature before rain. Then he said, "I believe your father and I are in agreement about the direction of things." She was very still. "He has been generous enough to share his hopes for your future," Ashwick continued, "and I believe those hopes are well matched with my own intentions." He looked at her with a warmth she could not find a flaw in technically. "I would very much like for us to come to an understanding, formally." There it was. He had not asked. He had said intentions and understanding and hopes, and all of those words pointed at a question without being one, which meant she could not answer it without seeming to be reacting to something that had not technically been proposed. She had 3 seconds, she counted them. "I am very flattered by your regard," she said. "But," he asked pleasantly, as though the but were a small and temporary thing. "But I would not wish to enter any formal arrangement without more time." She kept her voice measured. "I think it important that we know each other properly before anything is concluded." The warmth in his face did not leave. It simply became slightly more deliberate. "Of course," he said. "Time is something I am prepared to be patient about." And then, still pleasantly, still warmly, "I would simply note that your father seems to feel that the time question has already been addressed. He expressed some eagerness on that front." She held his gaze. He was still smiling. The roses behind him were very pink. The sound of the party was 20 yards away. He was not threatening her. He was simply telling her that the decision had already been made by someone else, and she was the last to know, and this information was being presented to her as a kindness. "I see," she said. "I hope you do," he said. "I am not a man who wishes to rush you. I simply believe in honesty between people who are going to share a life. People who are going to, not people who might. People who are going to." She was deciding what to say next, choosing the words very carefully the way you choose footing on wet stone, when she felt rather than heard someone arrive beside her. "Miss Voss," Edmund Caro's voice was at her left. "I believe we spoke about the Fortescue Library this morning. Did you want to see it before the afternoon got away from us?" She turned. He was standing at her elbow, entirely composed, with an expression that said he had appeared here because he was simply going to the library, which anyone might do. He had a glass of something in his hand. He had not been within 20 yards of her for the past hour. She had checked twice. Ashwick looked at him. Edmund looked at Ashwick, with a mild, polite attention that was as warm as the inside of a room with no fire in it. "My lord," Edmund said. "Your Grace," Ashwick's smile shifted to accommodate the interruption, adjusted. I didn't realize you were acquainted with Miss Voss beyond the... Her family and mine have been neighbors in the summer for years, Edmund said. It was true, old connections. He looked at Alara. Did you want to see the library? They had not spoken about any library, they both knew this. She looked at him for exactly 1 moment. Yes, she said, I was looking forward to it. Edmund nodded to Ashwick. Ashwick had no graceful way to object. He inclined his head, his smile still in place, but thinner now, more precise, like a tool being used at the wrong angle. We'll continue our conversation, he said to Alara. Of course, she said. Edmund touched the lightest possible hand to her arm, barely a pressure to indicate the direction, and they walked. Past the roses, back along the path toward the house. The voices of the party came up around them as they re-entered the main gathering, and the sound was like returning to something normal after a long time somewhere quiet and cold. She breathed. They were in the middle of a considerable number of people, and he was walking beside her at a pace that was unhurried, and she was not sure whether she was grateful or undone or both, and she was currently cataloguing her own feelings the way she catalogued books on shelves, because it was the only way she knew how to hold them. I don't know where the library is, she said quietly. 3rd floor left corridor, a pause. I asked the butler when I arrived. She looked at him sideways. When did you arrive? About an hour ago. He did not look at her. I was on the other side of the garden. She absorbed this. He had been on the other side of the garden for an hour and had appeared at her side at exactly the moment that he had. Thank you, she said. It was not large enough for what she meant, but it was what she had. He was making a point he had no right to make, Edmund said simply, in a setting that made it difficult for you to respond. Yes, that's a calculated thing to do. Yes, she looked ahead at the path through the middle of the party. He told me my father has expressed eagerness. In terms of timing. I know. She turned her head. He was still looking forward. How do you know? She asked. Your father has spoken to several people this season. People talk, solicitors compare notes. He glanced at her. He means to have you settled by August. August, 5 months. The word sat in her chest like something heavy that had been dropped from a height. He has not told me that, she said. No, just that. Just know with the weight of understanding what that meant, that she had been navigated around rather than through. They had reached the side terrace, where a small group of people she vaguely recognized were discussing something with enthusiasm. Edmund steered them slightly to the left, into a quieter patch of path, and they stopped, apparently taking in a very ordinary view of the side garden, which was a thin pretense but sufficient for the moment. Are you all right? He asked. 3 words, very quiet, asked with the attention he gave everything, that quality of actually wanting to know the answer. She nearly told him. She came so close that she could feel the shape of the words forming. The particular architecture of I have been trying to manage this alone for weeks, and I am not sure I am managing it, and also, and this is the part I have not told anyone, I am only in this situation at all because the person I actually want cannot want me back. She felt all of that forming. She held it. Yes, she said. I'm fine. He looked at her for a moment. He did not believe her. She could see that he did not believe her and that he had chosen not to push it, which was both a relief and a small, specific kind of hurt. The library offer stands, he said, if you actually want to see it. I would like that, she said. And then, because she needed something to hold on to that was not the thing she could not say, what's in it? Fortescue collects maps, 16th and 17th century. Some of them are genuinely remarkable. Maps, old ones before people had agreed on the shapes of things. He said it simply as a fact, the way he said most things. I find them interesting. The world looked different when no one had finished seeing it yet. She looked at him. He was already moving toward the house. She followed, and the garden was very still behind them, and Ashwick was somewhere back among the roses, and her father was somewhere in the city thinking about August, and she was walking toward a library full of maps made before anyone had agreed on the shapes of things. She thought that was, accidentally, the most honest description of her life she had heard in months. Ashwick arrived the following afternoon. Not at Alara's home, at Edmund's. Edmund was with his estate manager when Pearson, his butler, appeared in the study doorway with the card on a small tray, and Edmund looked at the name on the card for a moment with the same expression he used when reviewing accounts that had come in higher than expected. Not surprised, not unprepared, simply noting that a reckoning had arrived. He told Pearson to show Lord Ashwick to the front drawing room and asked his estate manager if they could continue on Thursday. The estate manager, who had known Edmund for 12 years and could read the specific quality of his employer's stillness, said Thursday was perfectly convenient and showed himself out. Edmund set down his pen. He straightened 2 papers on his desk for no reason other than that he wanted a moment. Then he stood, adjusted his jacket, and went downstairs. Ashwick was standing in the center of the drawing room with the air of a man who has assessed the room and found it slightly richer than his own, which Edmund suspected was intentional. He had a polished, pleasant face that worked very well in company. He was dressed well. He had the posture of someone who had been told since youth that his posture communicated authority and who had believed it. He was holding a pair of riding gloves and turning them in his hands, which was the only sign that he was not quite as easy as he appeared. "Your Grace," he smiled, a good smile, very practiced. "Thank you for receiving me without notice." "Please sit," Edmund said. He did not sit himself. He stood near the fireplace, where the light was behind him, which gave him no advantage in any way that mattered, and which he had not done deliberately. He had done it slightly deliberately. Ashwick sat. He placed the gloves on the arm of the chair and folded his hands. "I'll be direct," he said. "I appreciate directness." "So do I," Edmund said. A pause in which both of them confirmed they had agreed on something and that the agreement was covering something else. "I have an understanding with the Voss family," Ashwick said. "With Mr. Voss specifically, I think you're aware of this." "I'm aware that you have spoken with Mr. Voss," Edmund said. "I'm aware that you've described that conversation as an understanding." Ashwick's smile remained. "I notice you use a different word." "I use the word that describes a fact," Edmund said. "An understanding between 2 men, one of whom is not the woman in question, is a conversation, not an understanding." The gloves shifted slightly on the arm of the chair. Ashwick's smile adjusted by a fraction. "I see we're going to have a philosophical discussion." "If you like." "What I'd like," Ashwick said, and now the warmth in his voice was still present but had become more structural. The warmth of a man who has decided warmth is the tool he is going to use, is to understand the Duke of Harwick's particular interest in a young woman whose family and mine are simply in conversation. Edmund looked at him. He kept his expression exactly where it was. "Miss Voss's family have been our neighbors in the country for years," he said. "My sister and she are close friends. I have known her since she was a girl." "Yes," Ashwick said, "I understand that. I'm asking about the garden party." "She was there, I was there, we spoke." "You extracted her from a private conversation." "I invited her to see the library," Edmund said. "Lady Fortescue's library is open to guests." Ashwick looked at him for a moment. Then he uncrossed his legs and leaned back in the chair with the ease of a man who has decided to try a different angle. "I admire loyalty," he said. "Truly, it is a quality I value, and I understand that a man in your position feels a certain protective instinct toward those in his circle." He paused. "I would simply note," he said, and here the warmth became a different thing entirely, the warmth of something that is warm on the surface and something else beneath, that a man in your position also has a great deal to protect. Reputation, family, a sister still unmarried, these things are delicate. The room was very quiet. Outside, a carriage passed on the street, a horse, the sound of wheels on stone, then quiet again. Edmund looked at Ashwick. He looked at him for long enough that the silence had texture. "Say that again," Edmund said pleasantly. Ashwick's smile held. "I'm simply observing that we all have things we care about, that's all I'm saying." "No," Edmund said, "you're saying something specific. You're saying that my involvement with a situation that concerns you might have consequences you are in a position to arrange." He said it the same way he said everything, evenly, without ornamentation, the way a person reads aloud something that is simply true. "That is what you are saying." Ashwick said nothing. "I appreciate directness," Edmund said, "so I will be direct. Whatever obligations you believe Mr. Voss has entered into, those obligations depend on Miss Voss agreeing to them. She has not agreed to them. She has said she needs more time, which is a thing a woman says when she means she is not sure she wants to say yes. He picked up a pen from the mantelpiece, not to use it, simply to have something to put down again. My sister is 20 years old and has no concern in this matter whatsoever. I would encourage you not to make her one. Ashwick's expression had changed. The warmth was still there, but it had become something more deliberate, the warmth of a man who has recalibrated and decided that he needs to recover ground. I meant no offense, he said. You meant exactly the offense you offered, Edmund said. You're simply finding that it hasn't produced the result you wanted. The silence came back. Ashwick looked at his gloves. He picked them up. You're a powerful man, Ashwick said, and now his voice had dropped its performance almost entirely. What was left was something more honest, which was not more pleasant. But you can't want to make an enemy over a woman who isn't yours. Edmund said nothing for a moment. He set down the pen. You're right that she isn't mine, he said. She is her own, which is exactly the point you seem to be missing. Ashwick stood. He was not quite the same height as Edmund, but he held himself as though he were, the quality of a man who has spent a great deal of his life compensating for things through posture. Good afternoon, Your Grace, he said. He kept his voice smooth. He was very good at that, the smoothness. Good afternoon, Edmund said. Pearson appeared at the door as though he had been waiting, which he had been. Ashwick was shown out. The front door closed with a sound that was entirely normal and yet felt, in the silence that followed, very complete. Edmund stood in his drawing room for a long time. Then he went upstairs to his study and sat at his desk and picked up his pen and started a letter. He wrote the date, he wrote the salutation, Dear Alara. He wrote 3 sentences about the afternoon's visit, clear and factual sentences, the kind he was good at. He told her Ashwick had come. He told her what had been said. He told her she should know because this was information and she was someone who used information well. He read it back. Then he folded it in half and set it aside. He started a second letter. He got as far as the date. He stopped. He sat there with both letters in front of him and the light changing in the window behind him as the afternoon moved toward evening, and he thought about what he was doing and why, and he tried to be honest with himself the way he was usually honest with himself. The first letter was straightforward. She should know that Ashwick had escalated. That was simple and correct. The second letter was something else. The second letter, the one he had not written more than a date on, would have said things that were considerably harder to say. It would have said that he had been watching the situation for weeks. That he had had his solicitor pull documents first thing on a Tuesday morning, not because he made a practice of investigating everyone his sister knew, but because of a specific quality of straightness in Alara Voss's shoulders at a supper room doorway that had not left him alone since he saw it. It would have said that he was not entirely sure when it had happened, the thing that had happened, but that he was reasonably certain it had been happening for longer than he had been willing to look at it directly. It would have said something about the breakfast room and the way she counted books when she was managing something she could not say aloud. He had not finished this letter because he had not yet decided what right he had to feel the things that would require him to finish it. He was not a man who acted on incomplete thinking. He had learned in the long particular education of being responsible for many things and many people, that action taken from incomplete thinking was action you repented at your leisure. He had made 2 errors in his life that way, small ones, domestic ones, nothing catastrophic, and he had not forgotten the particular quality of that regret, the feeling of having moved before the ground was solid. The ground was not yet solid. He had a thinly disguised threat from a man with financial troubles and a smooth face. He had a woman who was being navigated around by her own father in the direction of that man. He had a feeling that was getting less deniable every Tuesday morning. He looked at the first letter. He folded it and sealed it and wrote her address on the outside. He looked at the second letter, the one with only a date on it. He picked it up. He held it for a moment. Then he set it down on the far side of the desk, in the corner where things went when they were not ready to become anything yet. He called Pearson. He gave him the first letter. He told him to have it delivered to the Voss house. Then he sat alone in his study while the city outside went on doing what cities do, filling itself with noise and motion and the completely ordinary business of lives going forward, all the small decisions and the large ones, the things people reached for and the things they put down in corners for later. He did not sleep easily that night. In the morning, before he could think about it sufficiently to stop himself, He took the second letter from the corner of the desk, added 3 more paragraphs, and then read what he had written. He sat with it for a long time. Then he crumpled it up and dropped it in the basket by the desk. It hit the wicker with a sound that was entirely ordinary, and he went to breakfast and ate it, and did not mention to Cora what had been in the letter, because there was nothing to mention, because it was paper and ink in a basket and nothing more. Except that at 10 minutes past noon, when Cora mentioned that Alara's family had received a letter from Lord Ashwick formally requesting a meeting with her father to discuss terms, Edmund sat very still for 4 seconds and then stood and said he needed to speak with his solicitor. He was at his solicitor's office by noon. By 2 o'clock, he was somewhere considerably more useful. He was thinking carefully and completely for the first time. Cora Carroll had known for 2 years. She had known in the particular way that people who pay close attention always know, not from a single moment of revelation, but from the slow accumulation of small evidence that one day simply reaches a weight you can no longer pretend not to feel. The first piece had been a Tuesday in October 2 seasons ago, when Alara had arrived at the breakfast room already mid-thought about something Edmund had said at a dinner the week before. She had quoted him, accurately, entirely, word for word, then caught herself and moved on quickly with the fluency of someone who did not want to examine what it meant that she could do that. Cora had looked at her toast. The second piece had been Alara's birthday the previous March, when Edmund had given her a book, which was not unusual. He often gave books, but it had been a specific book. A collection of essays on land reform that she had mentioned in passing at a breakfast table 6 weeks earlier, in a conversation that had included 4 other people. He had given her a copy with a card that said only, "For the informed opinion." Alara had read the card twice. She had then folded it very carefully and put it in her coat pocket. The third piece had been the Bradmore ball. By then Cora had accumulated enough evidence to be fairly certain. She was not entirely certain, because Alara was exceptional at management, at the precise and careful housing of things she had decided not to examine. But Cora had grown up with Edmund, which meant she was also exceptional at reading a kind of stillness that looked like nothing and was actually the opposite of nothing. He had been very still when he looked across that ballroom. She had filed it, she had waited, she was very patient by nature and by practice. She had watched Edmund navigate their father's death and the estate questions, and the years of being responsible before he had finished growing into the height of responsibility, and she had learned that he moved toward things only when he was certain, and that making him move before he was certain accomplished nothing except to make him more certain that waiting was the right choice. She could not make him move, she could not make Alara speak, she could nudge occasionally, she could arrange breakfasts, she could mention calendar events with a tone that meant something and then be very busy with her tea. She was an excellent sister. On the Thursday after the Fortescue party, Edmund came home from his solicitor's office and went straight to his study without stopping for lunch, which meant something specific had happened. Cora gave him 40 minutes. Then she knocked on the study door and brought him tea he had not asked for, which was their household's established language for, "I am here if you want to talk about it." He was standing at the window. The afternoon light was coming in from the wrong angle, making the room feel later than it was. Ashwick formally requested a meeting with her father, he said, without turning around, to discuss terms. "I know," Cora said. She set the tea down. "Alara wrote to me this morning." "She wrote to you?" "She writes to me when she's thinking about something she doesn't have words for yet. She usually talks about something else entirely." She sat in the chair by the fireplace. She wrote about a hat she was thinking of buying. She described the hat for 3 paragraphs. He turned. His expression was the one she had learned meant he was holding several things at once and had not yet decided which to address first. "She's going to let it go forward," Cora said. "I know. Not because she wants to, because she believes the situation is fixed and she's trying to." "I know," he said again, quietly, not impatient, just that particular quality he had of acknowledging a fact completely so it could be set aside and the next one addressed. "Edmund," she folded her hands in her lap, "what are you going to do?" He was quiet for long enough that the fire made the only noise in the room. "I don't know what I have the right to do," he said. She looked at him. This was the most honest thing he had said to her in a long time, Maybe the most honest thing he had said to her about anything that wasn't estates or accounts or practical matters. It arrived with the slightly raw quality of something that had been held inside something else and had finally come out without its outer layer. "What do you want to do?" she asked. He picked up the tea she had brought him, held it, did not drink it. "She counts things when she's managing something she can't say," he said. Cora blinked. "What?" "Books on shelves, people in blue. Panes in windows." He set the cup down. "I noticed it at the Bradmore ball. She was with Ashwick and she was looking at the room and I could tell she was counting something." Cora was very still. "You could tell." "She does it when she's in a situation that doesn't fit but she's decided to stay in it." He moved away from the window. "Tuesday morning at breakfast she told us about Ashwick calling formally. She said he brought large flowers. And I watched her and I thought, she is going to do this. She is going to do it because she thinks the path is closed in all other directions. And she will be very composed about it, and she will make it manageable, and she will count the things in whatever room she ends up in, and that will be the end of it." The room was quiet. "Then I see," Cora said, "and how does that make you feel?" He looked at her sharply, as though he had not intended to invite the question that his own words had made inevitable. "I'm not asking to be difficult," she said. "I'm asking because you have apparently noticed a great deal about how Alara behaves in rooms for a man who has no particular feelings about Alara." He sat down. This was unusual. He rarely sat in his own study. He stood or paced or leaned against the mantelpiece. Sitting meant the legs had decided they were done holding things up for the moment. "She won't ask for help," he said. "She'll manage it. She'll frame it as managing it even to herself." "Yes, and if I intervene in a way that isn't," he stopped, started again. "If I am seen to interfere based on something that is only, if my reasons are." "Edmund," he stopped. "I have known for 2 years," she said, "that you are Cora's brother is the same sentence as that you are the reason she hasn't been able to seriously consider anyone else. Those are not two separate sentences." He looked at her. "She thinks she is invisible to you," Cora said. "She has decided that your kindness and your attention, and the fact that you know exactly which book she mentioned in a 6-week-old conversation, are simply characteristics of a man who is kind and attentive to everyone." "I am kind to a lot of people." "You are not kind to a lot of people in the way you are kind to her. Edmund, you had your solicitor pull documents before 8 in the morning." He was quiet. "You went to the Fortescue party," she said. "You asked your butler where the library was before the party started. You positioned yourself well enough to see what was happening on the other side of a rose garden." "Those are all." "Tell me what they are," Cora said gently. "Tell me what they are. That is not what I am saying they are, and I will believe you." He did not answer. The fire settled. Outside, a door in the house closed somewhere distant, and the sound traveled through the walls the way sounds do in old buildings, faint and particular. "She is going to let it go forward," he said again, "unless something changes." "Yes, what I do about that has to be, it cannot be based on," he stopped. "I need it to be clean. I need what I do to be something she can accept without it being something she feels she owes." "Then don't make her owe you anything," Cora said. "Do what needs to be done because it needs to be done. Deal with Ashwick because Ashwick needs to be dealt with. That part doesn't have to be about your feelings. It can simply be right." He absorbed this. "And the other part," he said. "The other part," Cora considered her words. She was careful with them. "The other part you will have to say aloud, to her, not to me, not to a letter, not to a crumpled piece of paper in the basket by your desk." He looked at her very sharply. "I emptied it last week," she said. "The basket, I wasn't reading your letters. I simply noticed there was only a date and 3 paragraphs on a crumpled page, and I put it back because it seemed like something you might want to keep." He said nothing. "It's on the second shelf," she said. "Behind the blue volume on agricultural policy. I put it somewhere useful." He was very still. Then, despite himself, or perhaps because of himself, something changed in his expression. A loosening, small and involuntary, the kind that happens when a person has been holding something at a particular tension for a long time and something finally lets. "You are an extraordinary amount of trouble," he said. "Yes," she said, "and you rely on me completely. Now drink your tea and tell me what you're actually going to do about Lord Ashwick." He drank his tea. Then he told her. She listened carefully, and when he was finished she asked 3 questions and he answered them, and the plan that resulted was not complicated. It was simply what needed to happen, done cleanly and without theater. She approved of it. She approved of him on this particular afternoon more than she had in a long time. She had always loved her brother. She had sometimes found him frustratingly slow, the way people who think carefully are slow, making their way toward the right thing by the most thorough possible path. He had made it now to the right thing by the thorough path. She picked up her own tea, which had gone cold while they talked, and drank it anyway. She doesn't know, he said at the door, what you know about her. No, Cora said. She thinks she's hidden it very well. Has she? From you for quite a long time. A pause. Not from me since the day she folded that birthday card and put it in her pocket. He nodded. The door, the hallway, the particular sound of Edmund Caro going somewhere with a purpose. Cora sat by the fire for a while longer. She thought about Alara writing 3 paragraphs about a hat. She thought about her brother memorizing a book title mentioned once in a 6-week-old conversation. She thought about 2 people who were both, in their own specific and well-practiced ways, very good at not saying things. She hoped, quietly and with the patience of someone who had been waiting long enough, that the not saying was nearly over. There were only so many hats you could describe before someone noticed you were describing them. The Whitmore Musicale was on a Friday evening, and Edmund saved her a seat. He had never saved her a seat before. She knew this the way she knew which things he had and hadn't done, the way she had been cataloging his behavior for 3 years with the precision of someone who tells themselves they are simply observant. She was observant. She was also cataloging his behavior. Both things were true, and she had made her peace with the second one by filing it under the first. He was already in the second row when she arrived with Cora, standing at the end, and when he saw them come through the door he moved 1 seat left and said, to no one in particular but clearly in her direction, "I kept these if you wanted them." Cora said, "How thoughtful," and then sat down immediately, which placed Alara in the chair next to Edmund, which was exactly what had happened and which no one had technically arranged. She sat, she placed her gloves in her lap. She looked at the musicians setting up at the front of the room and thought about the particular construction of the word thoughtful and how it had contained absolutely no expression. The musicale began with a string quartet. They were good, genuinely good, the kind of performance where the room gradually stopped pretending to be attentive and actually became so. She let herself be absorbed in it, the particular relief of music that required nothing from you except to be present, and for a while she was simply there in the room without any of the things she usually carried. Then Edmund leaned slightly toward her. "The cellist is overdoing the vibrato on the slow passages," he said very quietly. She nearly smiled, a small amount. "He knows he's good at it," Edmund said. "The problem with knowing you're good at something is that you tend to use it past the point where it serves." She looked at the cellist. He was, in fact, deploying the vibrato with a certain confidence. "He'll regret it in the 3rd movement." "Yes," Edmund said and settled back. That was all, a moment, a sentence, a small shared joke that required no setup because they had been having versions of it for years. The dry running assessment of whatever room they were in, the quiet commentary that didn't need performance, that could be said quietly and leave no trace. But his shoulder was still close to hers. The chairs were not widely spaced. He had leaned over to say the thing about the cellist and had not, she now realized, moved fully back. There was perhaps 4 inches between them, perhaps 3. She looked at the musicians. 3 inches was not significant. People sat 3 inches apart in crowded rooms constantly. This was a crowded room. 3 inches was architecture, not intent. She counted the musicians instead. 6. 4 strings, a piano, and a young woman in green who would be singing in the second half. The first half lasted 45 minutes. She counted 11 other things during it. She was aware of this and chose not to examine it. At the interval they stood for a few minutes in the kind of standing that happens at intervals, the room reorganizing itself, people moving toward refreshments, small conversations forming and dissolving. Edmund brought her a glass of water without being asked, which was the sort of small thing he did that made her feel both grateful and confused, because she could not tell whether it was kindness, which was simply his character or something else, which was something she had forbidden herself to look for. "You've been avoiding Ashwick tonight," he said. She took the glass. "He isn't here." He was invited. Edmund held his own glass, looking not at her but at the room in its general configuration. He declined. "I'm told he had a prior engagement." Something in his voice was not quite neutral. It was close to neutral. It was the very near relative of neutral. "You know what he was doing instead?" she asked. "I know a number of things I didn't know a week ago." He drank. Still not looking at her. "My solicitor has been thorough." "Your solicitor," she said carefully, "has been very busy on my behalf." "He has been thorough," Edmund said again without changing the sentence. She looked at his profile, the particular quality of his jaw when he was being careful about something. She had memorized this too, and she was fully aware of it, and she looked anyway. "Why?" she asked. He turned and looked at her then, not the brief eye contact of the ballroom, not the polite exchange of people who know each other. He looked at her with the full attention she had felt before and usually fled from and could not, in 3 inches of space, flee from now. "Because the situation required it," he said. "That is the same answer you gave me about telling me the information in the first place." "Yes, it is still not an answer." He held her gaze. 1 second, 2. In the corner of the room someone laughed at something and the sound broke the moment at its edges without quite dissolving it. "No," he said, "it isn't." Then the bell rang for the second half and people began moving back to their seats and Cora appeared from somewhere and sat down, and the moment, which had been perhaps a moment and perhaps something else, closed up the way a book closes, completely, leaving only the shape of where it had been. They sat through the second half. The soprano in green was remarkable. The cellist moderated his vibrato as she had predicted. Edmund was 3 inches away from her for the duration. She stared at the musicians and heard every note and registered approximately none of them. After, in the carriage line outside, where the night air was cool and the breath of horses made small clouds in it, she stood with Cora and waited. Edmund was slightly behind them, speaking with the host's husband about something agricultural, which was the kind of conversation he could have with one ear while the other part of him was elsewhere. Her carriage was announced. She turned to say goodbye to Cora, who was watching her with the expression of someone who has been very patient and is beginning to require some acknowledgement of the thing they have been patient about. "He saved you a seat," Cora said very quietly. "The row was crowded," Ilara said. "Ilara, people keep seats for friends all the time. He asked me this morning which row you prefer to sit in." She held Cora's gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away, at the carriage line, at the horses, at the dark above the roofline, at anything that was not the expression on her best friend's face. "Good night, Cora," she said. "He asked me," Cora said, softly, gently, as though she were placing something fragile on a surface. "First thing this morning. He came down to breakfast and asked if we were attending the Whitmore Musicale and which row you usually preferred. The carriage was there, the footman had the door, everything was exactly as it should be. She got in, she arranged her skirts. The door closed with the soft, complete sound it always made. She sat in the dark interior of the carriage as it pulled away, and she looked at her hands in her lap, and she thought about the chair, about the cellist's vibrato, about the way he had leaned over to say something and not quite leaned back. He had asked which row she preferred. He had found out first thing on a Tuesday morning about Ashwick's finances. He had been on the other side of a garden and appeared at exactly the right moment. He had said she was making a point he had no right to make. And then, "Are you all right?" And then when she had said yes, he had not believed her and he had known she had said it anyway and he had not pushed it, which was either courtesy or something else. He was a man who paid attention. He was attentive by nature. He paid attention to a great many things and a great many people. She was one of them. She told herself this. She said it very clearly in the language of certainty, in the voice she used when she needed to be certain. He is Cora's brother, he is kind, he is a man who pays attention, and that is all that is here. She said it 3 times. She said it with the conviction of someone who has been saying it for long enough to have given it credibility. Then she pressed her hand flat against the carriage seat beside her, against the worn leather that was warm from the evening, and she sat in that attitude for the rest of the ride home, perfectly still, perfectly composed, feeling the seam between what she knew and what she had been working very hard not to know grow finer and finer, until it was barely the width of a breath. She did not cross it. Not tonight, not yet. She walked into her house and up to her room, and she sat at her window for a long time looking at the city going quiet and dark around her. And she thought about borrowed pearls and garden libraries and old maps made before anyone had agreed on the shapes of things. And then she thought about the chair, 3 inches, his shoulder and hers. She thought about that last. She thought about it for a long time. Then she got up, brushed her hair and went to bed, and did not sleep for quite a while, and when she finally did, she did not remember what she had dreamed. It was probably nothing significant. She was nearly certain it was nothing significant. She held that certainty in both hands all through the night, and by morning it had grown thinner in the light the way ice does, still solid, still there, but you could see through it now. You could see through it completely. It happened at the Hartley dinner on a Tuesday, the last week of April. Alara had been invited weeks in advance, before any of the Ashwick situation had taken its current shape, and she had accepted because the Hartleys were kind people and their cook was exceptional, and she had not, at the time of accepting, anticipated that the dinner would become the place where everything cracked open. There were 14 people at the table. She was seated near the middle, between a Colonel Firth who talked about his dogs with genuine love and a Mrs. Neville who talked about everyone else's marriages with a specific kind of appetite. She managed them both. She ate the first course and the second, and said the right things at the right moments, and kept her face exactly where she needed it to be. Ashwick was at the far end of the table. She had not known he would be there. The seating arrangements were the host's business, and she was not in the habit of demanding advance notice of other guests, but when she had walked in and seen him already at his place, something had gone still and careful in her. He had not said anything to her during the meal. He had not needed to. He watched. She felt it the way you feel whether, not looking at the source directly but knowing it was there. Edmund was not present. She noticed this the way she had been noticing his presence and absence for months, with the particular acuity of someone who has stopped pretending they are not noticing. The meal moved forward. The third course was very good. She was listening to Colonel Firth describe a hunting dog named Henderson who had apparently demonstrated remarkable intelligence and emotional sensitivity for an animal of his type, and she was genuinely finding it interesting, and the dinner had approximately 20 minutes left to it, and then it would be over, and she would go home, and none of the things she had been fearing since she walked in would have come to pass. Lord Hartley stood to say a few words, as hosts sometimes did at the end of a dinner, a toast of some variety. She picked up her glass and attended. He said pleasant things about his wife. He said pleasant things about the season. And then he said, "And we are delighted to share in a matter of considerable happiness tonight, as Lord Ashwick has asked to say a word on a subject close to his heart." She went completely still. Everything in her went completely still, the way a landscape goes still before a storm, the air pulling tight. Ashwick rose. He was composed. He was warm. He was exactly what he had been trained to be in exactly this kind of moment, a man who filled a room with easy confidence. "Thank you, my lord," he said. "I'll not speak at length. I simply wish to share something that brings me a great deal of happiness." He looked down the table at her, a warm look, a public look. "With the blessing of her family, I hope that Miss Voss will do me the honor of agreeing to our engagement." The table responded. The sound of it rose around her. Surprise, pleasure, the specific noise of a social gathering encountering something it had been trained to find delightful. 14 faces turned toward her. She was aware in remarkable detail of the following: the weight of the fork in her right hand which she had not put down, the angle of the candlelight on the table linen, Henderson the hunting dog who had been described as having a soul above his station, her own breathing which had gone flat and controlled, the breathing of someone deciding very carefully what to do. She opened her mouth. The table waited. She had 2 seconds, perhaps 3, before silence became its own statement. "I wasn't aware," said a voice from the doorway, "that Miss Voss had accepted." Every head turned. Edmund Carew was standing in the entrance of the dining room in his coat and hat, as though he had arrived late and been brought directly from the hall. He was looking at the table with the expression he used for things that required clarity. Not unkind, not performative, simply exactly clear. Lord Hartley said, "Your Grace, we weren't." Forgive the late arrival, Edmund said. I was unavoidably delayed. He looked at Ashwick. I didn't realize I'd walked in at a consequential moment. Ashwick's warmth remained in place through what must have been a considerable effort. The moment is, as I said, a happy one. Congratulations are premature, Edmund said pleasantly. An engagement requires 2 agreements. I only heard one. The room was very quiet. Ashwick set down his glass. He did it slowly. I believe the agreement of Miss Voss's family is not the same as the agreement of Miss Voss, Edmund said. He looked for a brief moment directly at her. She sat with the fork still in her hand and her face exactly where she needed it to be, and she looked back at him. The room was watching them both. If Miss Voss would like to confirm the arrangement, Ashwick said, still smooth, still managing, then I think we can proceed. Then she'll say so, Edmund said. Will you, Elara? Her name. He said her name in front of 14 people, which he had never done in any social context, which was either a significant choice or a slip, and neither option left her without something to feel. She looked at Ashwick, who was watching her with the focused warmth of a man who has laid a very specific trap and needs only one word to close it. She looked at Edmund, who was watching her with the expression of a man who would accept any answer she gave and would not, under any circumstances, decide it for her. She set her fork down. No, she said. Not dramatically, not loudly, clearly in the voice she used for things she had decided completely. The dining room sat with this. Ashwick said, Miss Voss, I believe your father. My father's agreement is his business, she said. Her voice did not shake. She was grateful for this, deeply and specifically grateful. Mine is mine. Ashwick looked at her. The warmth had not left his face. It had simply changed into something that made the room around them feel slightly colder. I see, he said. I hope you do, she said. He sat down. The movement was controlled and complete. He picked up his glass. He drank. He turned to the man on his left and said something about the wine, and the dinner resumed, jerkily, uncertainly, the way a machine resumes after catching. Lord Hartley said something to a footman. The footman moved. The service continued. Mrs. Neville, beside her, began talking about a cousin in Yorkshire, which was either an act of social mercy or the result of an inability to stop talking under any circumstances. Elara let her talk. Edmund had moved into the room. He had taken the empty place that had apparently been set for him at the head of the table near the host, which meant he had been expected, which meant his late arrival had been managed, which meant the timing of his entrance had been decided rather than coincidental. She stared at her plate. She thought about that for the remaining 20 minutes of the dinner. She was out the door fast, perhaps faster than was appropriate, the moment the company separated. She needed the hallway. She needed the particular quality of hallway air after a large room, the cooler temperature, the smaller sound, the feeling of a space that was not watching you. She was halfway to her coat when she heard him behind her. Elara. She turned. He was standing 6 feet away, in the dim light of the hall, still in his coat, and he was looking at her the way he had looked at her across the dining room, with the complete and steady attention of someone who was not performing any of this. You knew about tonight, she said. It was not quite a question. Yes. How? Ashwick's man spoke to your father's man, and your father's man mentioned it to someone connected to my household. She absorbed this. You came because of that. Yes. And your timing. I was in the carriage around the corner, he said simply. I had asked Pearson to find out when the main course was cleared, so I would arrive at the right moment, a pause, or close enough to it. She stared at him. You staged an entrance. I staged an arrival, he said. There is a difference. I didn't know exactly what Ashwick would say or when. I simply knew it would be this evening and that I wanted to be here. She searched his face for something. She was not sure what she was searching for. Why, she asked. The same question she kept asking him, the one that kept arriving without a sufficient answer. He looked at her for a long moment. In the hall behind him, a footman passed at a distance with a tray, and then they were alone again. Because you were going to be in a room with no easy way out, he said, and I was not willing to leave you in it. She felt something shift inside her, not loudly, quietly, the way a tide shifts without drama, simply the water moving where it moves. I said no, she said, on my own. Yes, and there was something in his face when he said it, something that was not quite pride and not quite relief but held both of them. You did. You didn't need to be here. No, he agreed, I didn't need to be. The word need hung there between them. She looked at him, he looked at her. The hallway was dim and cool and perfectly quiet, the dinner behind them reassembling itself without them. She had things she wanted to say. She felt them the way you feel water rising, the particular pressure of something that has been contained for too long in a space that was never quite the right size. She held it. Not tonight, not in a hallway that smelled of other people's candles, not after an evening that had already been more than she could comfortably hold. Thank you, she said, for the third time, still not enough, still what she had. Yes, he said, not your welcome, just yes, the way he acknowledged things that were real. Her carriage was announced. She turned toward the door. Ilara, her name again, she stopped. Your father is going to be difficult about this. I know. If he needs someone to speak with. I'll manage it, she said. It's mine to manage. She said it and felt, the moment she did, the way he registered it. The slight change in his expression. The word choice, the pronoun, the exact sentence she said every time she meant to keep him at the distance she had decided was correct. She heard it herself, she felt what it cost her to say it. She went out to the carriage, she got in, she went home. She sat in her room for a long time in her coat, not having taken it off, and she thought about a man who had driven to a street corner and waited and asked a butler when the main course was cleared. She thought about the word need. She thought about all the things she had been managing alone by decision, not by necessity, and the distinction between those two things, and what it meant that the distinction had never felt as clear as it did right now. She took off her coat. She sat at her window. She did not count anything. Her father was, as predicted, difficult. He came to her room the morning after the Hartley dinner with the expression of a man who has been embarrassed in front of people he cares about impressing, and he said a number of things, some of which were about her decision and some of which were about him. She let him say them. She sat very still in the chair by the window and let the words move through the room and waited for the ones that were actually true. The ones that were true were, he was worried about money. He was tired of worry. He had made a decision that he thought solved a problem and he had not asked her, and he was now confronted with the fact that she had unmade it in front of 14 people, which meant the problem was still present and so was the embarrassment. She said, I know you are worried. I know this has been difficult, but you cannot enter an agreement on my behalf without speaking to me first. He said, I spoke to you. You met with him. You received him. I met with him, she said. I did not agree to marry him. I had reason to believe. You had reason to believe I would not refuse what you had already decided, she said. That is not the same as agreement. He was quiet for a moment. He was not a cruel man. He was a frightened man making decisions in the way frightened men often do, quickly, in the direction of the nearest solution, without fully considering the person most affected. Ilara, he said more quietly, the situation is not simple. I know it isn't. Ashwick was willing to, there are obligations. I know there are obligations, she said. I have known for some time. I have been watching you manage them and choosing not to say anything because it was not my place. But it is my life, father. What you are asking me to do with it has to be mine to decide. He sat down, this was new. He rarely sat when he was agitated. He stood and moved and spoke, all forward motion. Sitting meant something was getting through. I don't know what else to do, he said. It was small and honest, the smallest and most honest thing she had heard him say in years. She looked at him. She felt the complicated weight of loving a person who had disappointed you, the impossibility of separating those things cleanly, the way they lived together in the same space. I know, she said, but what you were trying to do would not have solved it. Ashwick's situation is not what he has presented to you. His obligations exceed yours. His reasons for pursuing this arrangement are, she stopped, chose the next words carefully. They are practical ones, not personal ones. Her father stared at her. How do you know this? Because someone told me, she said, someone who checked. He was quiet for a long time. Who? He asked. She looked out the window. The street below was doing its morning business, the ordinary forward motion of people going toward things. A friend, she said, someone who thought I should know. She did not say the name. She did not know precisely why she did not say the name, except that saying it felt like exposing something she had not finished understanding yet. Her father left, eventually. He left with the deflated look of a man who has been wrong and knows it, and will need some time with the wrongness before he is able to do anything useful with it. She sat at her window for an hour after he left. Then she put on her coat and walked to the Cairo townhouse. She did not plan this. She simply started walking and arrived there, which was the shape of it. Pearson opened the door. He told her without being asked that Miss Cora was out at her dressmaker, but that His Grace was in the study if she would like to wait in the... No, she said, I'll go up. Pearson looked at her for a fraction of a second. Of course, he said. She went upstairs. The study door was open. Edmund was at his desk with his back partly to the door, working through papers in the exact way he did everything, methodically, without wasted motion. He heard her, or heard the quality of the silence that meant someone was in the doorway, and looked up. His expression moved through something quickly, surprise, something past surprise, then the usual careful composure. Alara, he said. Cora is at the dressmaker, she said. Yes, he put down the pen. Are you all right? My father came to see me this morning. I expected he would. He stood, sit down. She did not sit down. She closed the door behind her instead, which was either entirely sensible for the purpose of private conversation or something she had decided before she could think about it. Edmund watched her. Why didn't you tell me you were going to be there last night, she said. You said you found out about Ashwick's plan. You could have written to me. You could have told me in advance. Yes, he said. Then why didn't you? He looked at her. He was considering something, the way he always considered things, with the thoroughness of a man who does not like to say incomplete versions of the truth. Because I was not certain, he said, that if I told you in advance you would let me come. She stared at him. You manage things, he said. You have decided that a great deal of it is yours to manage alone, and when I try to be involved you find a way to keep the boundary in place. You would have said it was unnecessary. You would have managed last night by yourself. I did manage it by myself. Yes, he said. You said no to him clearly and on your own, and I was proud of it, and I was also there. He looked directly at her. I wanted to be there. The room was very still. She had things pressing inside her. They had been pressing for months, and the door was closed, and he was looking at her without any of the careful distance she had relied on him to maintain. Why did you have your solicitor find out about Ashwick, she said. The real reason, not because it was information and I make decisions with information. The reason before that one. He held her gaze. Because the morning after the Bradmore ball, he said, I could not stop thinking about the way you looked when he walked you toward that supper room. She breathed, she kept her face still. And why couldn't you stop thinking about it, she asked. Her voice was very steady. She was proud of it in the same way she had been proud of herself at the dinner table. Because I have been paying attention to you, he said, for considerably longer than I have been willing to say so. He was not looking away. He had decided, apparently, not to look away. And somewhere in the past several years I moved from paying attention because you are Cora's friend, and you say interesting things about land reform, to paying attention because, he stopped, tried again, to paying attention in a way that has nothing to do with any of those reasons. She held very still. I should have said something sooner, he said. I know that. I was waiting until I was certain, and I kept being nearly certain, and then finding a reason to wait for more certainty, and in the meantime you were walking toward a situation that... That what, she said. Her voice had a quality in it now that she had not fully planned. That would have made it too late, he said quietly. The silence came back. Outside the window, London was doing everything it always did, completely indifferent to what was happening in this room. She looked at him, 3 years of looking at him from the correct distance, from the safe side of the line she had drawn. I have been in love with you, she said, for 3 years. It came out completely. No qualification, no careful management, just the full sentence with all of its weight. Edmund was still. Which is why, she continued, because she had started and the stopping point was no longer available, I was going to marry Ashwick. He was looking at her with the expression of someone who has just heard two things simultaneously and is processing both of them. "You were going to marry him," he said slowly, "because of how you feel about me." "Because I thought," she made a small, frustrated gesture, "because the alternative to marrying someone reasonable was spending my life waiting for something that was never going to be available to me. Because I thought if I waited I would simply be stationary, and stationary meant watching you from the same distance forever. Because—" "Elara," he said her name in the middle of the sentence, which made her stop. "Yes," she said. "That is," he said, in the carefully exact voice he used for things that were significant, "the most unfair thing anyone has ever said to me." She blinked. "It is the truth." "I know it's the truth," he said. "It is the truth that you were going to marry someone else because you had decided without asking me that I had no relevant feelings. And in the meantime I was having," he paused, "extremely relevant feelings for quite some time and choosing not to say anything until I was sufficiently certain, which apparently was not quickly enough." She stared at him. "You have relevant feelings," she said. "Extensively relevant feelings," he said, "for years." I never." "I know." He moved, came around the side of the desk, stopped about 3 feet away in the middle of the room. "I am not easy to read, I know that. I do not say things before I am ready to say them completely, and it took me longer than it should have to be ready." She looked at him. 3 feet. The distance she had been managing for 3 years, slightly reduced. "You could have said something," she said. "Any of the Tuesday mornings, any of the ballrooms, the library at the Fortescue party." "Yes," he said it simply. "I could have, I didn't." "Why not?" "Because every time I nearly did," he said. "You said something that made me think the ground wasn't ready. You said it was yours to manage, you held the distance." He looked at her steadily. "I kept thinking I was misreading it." "You were not misreading it," she said. "No," he said. "I was not." They stood in his study, 4 feet apart or 3, with 3 years of Tuesday mornings, and borrowed pearls and garden libraries and library chairs and carefully managed distances behind them, and the door closed, and nowhere to be for the foreseeable future. "I am very angry at you," she said. "I know. For making me manage all of this alone when you were having," she repeated his word back at him, "relevant feelings." Yes, he was not quite smiling, something near it. "That is fair." "It is extremely fair." "Yes." "And you are angry at me," she said, "for nearly marrying someone else without telling you why." "I have not decided yet whether I am angry or simply," he stopped, "something more complicated than angry." She held his gaze, he held hers. The room held them both. "What do we do now?" she asked. It came out quietly, without theater. Just the actual question, 3 years of not saying now said, all of it out in the room, and the next step genuinely unknown. He looked at her for a long moment. "I think," he said, "that I would like to take you to dinner, not a party, not a musicale, not something with 14 people watching." He said it plainly, without ceremony. "Just dinner, somewhere quiet where we can say whatever else needs to be said." "We have said quite a lot already," she said. "We have." A pause. "There is more." She believed him. She believed him in the way she believed things that were coming from somewhere very settled, not quickly, but with the completeness of things that are simply true. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow evening." "Yes." He nodded once, the nod, the one she had been cataloguing for 3 years, the one that acknowledged a thing completely, that said, "This is known and real and I have registered it fully." She went to the door, her hand was on it. "Edmund," she said. He looked up. "The Tuesday morning you came down for breakfast when I was there," she said. "The first time you mentioned Ashwick's finances, you said you had found out by asking your solicitor. When did you ask him?" He held her gaze. "First thing Monday morning," he said, "before 8. She stood with her hand on the door. "First thing," she said. "Yes." She nodded once, the same nod he used, borrowing it, returning it. Then she opened the door and went downstairs and out into the morning, and the morning was exactly what it had been when she arrived. The street, the light, the ordinary ongoing city. Everything felt different inside it. Not resolved, not complete, just opened the way a window is opened. The room is the same room, the same walls and furniture, but something has changed about what it contains. She walked home. She did not count anything. She did not need to. The restaurant he chose was in a quiet street behind Covent Garden, the kind of place that had been there long enough to have accumulated its own particular smell. Old wood and something warm, the type of smell that belonged to a room that had heard many conversations and retained none of them. She arrived first, which she had not intended, and was shown to a table in the corner where the light was good and the noise from the rest of the room was muffled and the walls were covered in maps. Old ones. She stood looking at them until Edmund arrived, which was perhaps 5 minutes later, and when he came through the door and she looked at him and then gestured at the walls, he stopped and looked at them and a small thing happened in his face. The particular expression of a man who has chosen something and had the choice confirmed as correct. "You planned this," she said when he reached the table. "I called ahead and asked about the decor," he said. He sat, he looked at the nearest map. 16th century, I think. The coast of what they called the New World looks entirely different. "It isn't accurate," she said. "No," he picked up the menu, "but someone drew it from the best information they had. That seems worth something." She sat across from him, in a restaurant chosen for maps, and picked up her own menu, and they were two people at a quiet dinner table in a way that was entirely ordinary and felt like nothing she had experienced before. She ordered the lamb. He ordered something she didn't register because she was watching him read the menu with the focused attention he gave everything, and she was aware that she was watching and did not make any effort to stop. They talked through the first course about things that were not the things, his estate, her morning which had been unremarkable, a book she was reading, which he had read the previous year and which led to a conversation that lasted longer than the course, the kind they had always had, where the words arrived without effort and went somewhere neither of them had planned. She had always loved talking to him. That had been the first thing, long before the rest of it, the specific pleasure of a conversation that went where it wanted, that didn't need to be managed, that was simply what it was. He refilled her glass. The restaurant talked quietly around them. "You said there was more to say," she said in the pause after the first course was cleared. "Last night in the study, you said there was more." "Yes," he set down his glass. He looked at her with the directness that had always made her feel equally seen and exposed. "I said things last night that I should have said considerably earlier." "Yes, I am aware that saying them late has costs that I don't get to decide for you," he said it plainly. "The months in which you were trying to find your way forward, managing it alone, going toward a situation that made sense practically even if it cost you personally. Those months existed because I was slow. You were also," she said, "being thorough, which is your nature." "That is generous." "It is accurate," she said. "You don't do things until you are certain. I know this about you. I have known it for years." "I should have been more uncertain earlier," he said, "and acted on it." She looked at him. Something in her chest was warm, had been warm since the previous morning, a warmth she kept not trusting and then confirming was still there. "You had your solicitor find out about Ashwick," she said. "You drove to a street corner and waited. You asked Cora which row I prefer to sit in. You memorized a book title from a 6-week-old conversation." She paused. "Those are not the actions of a man who was entirely unaware of his own feelings." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "they are not. They are the actions of a man who had feelings and was being careful about them." "Yes, too careful. Also yes." The second course arrived. They ate it without hurrying. Outside, through the restaurant's small windows, the evening was going on at its own pace, completely independent of theirs. He told her about the 3 letters. He said it without particular ceremony, in the same voice he used for everything that was true. He had written them. The first one not long after the Bradmore ball, which had said he did not like how Ashwick looked at her, and which he had sent. The second one after Tuesday breakfast when she had been told about the financial situation, which had said he was not certain why he cared as much as he did, and which he had not sent. The third one after Ashwick's visit to his house, which had said something considerably more complete, and which had ended up on the second shelf behind a volume on agricultural policy. "Cora found it," Elara said. He looked slightly pained. "Yes, she told you." "She told me she put it somewhere useful." Elara held her glass. "She didn't tell me what it said." "What it said," Edmund said, "was approximately what I told you in the study, with more words and worse grammar. written at 11 at night after a day that had been difficult. Grammar fails us all at 11 at night after difficult days, she said. This is true, a pause, I should have sent it. Or said it. Or said it, he looked at her. I was concerned about the ground, whether it was solid, whether what I was reading was real, or I was not confident that I was reading it correctly. You were reading it correctly, she said. I know that now. You knew it before, she said gently. You knew it when you found out which row I prefer. He was quiet, then very precisely as someone admitting a thing they have been managing, yes. Why did that feel safer? Doing things, memorizing things, showing up, but not saying the thing. He considered this for a long time, long enough that she was not sure he was going to answer. Because what I did could be explained away, he said at last, by both of us. I could call it being considerate, being a friend of the family, being attentive, which is my nature. If I had said the thing directly, it could only be what it was. And if I was wrong, if I had read the situation incorrectly, that would have been considerably harder to recover from. She absorbed this, she understood it. She understood it because she had done exactly the same thing from the other side. I told myself I was being practical, she said. About Ashwick, I told myself the situation was what it was and I was managing it sensibly, but I was also, she stopped. I was protecting myself from hoping for something I had decided was impossible. It is easier to tell yourself the door is closed than to spend every day looking at it. Yes, he said quietly. We were both being very careful, she said, in opposite directions. Yes, and then unexpectedly, are you still angry at me? She thought about it honestly. Less than yesterday, she said, more than I will be in a week. Something moved in his face, that involuntary loosening, the one she had seen once before. That seems like a reasonable trajectory. She looked at him across the table, the maps behind him, the old coastlines, the Gestalt shapes, the world drawn by people doing their best with limited information and no guarantee they were right. Ask me, she said. He looked at her. You have things to say, she said. You said so, there is more, so ask whatever you came here to ask. He was still for a moment, then he said it. Not in the way she might have expected, had she expected anything, which she had tried very hard not to do. He did not reach for her hand, he did not stand. He simply looked at her across the table with the steady attention she had catalogued for 3 years, the look that said I am seeing you completely, and said, plainly, will you marry me? She held this for exactly 3 seconds. Not because she was uncertain, because she wanted to feel the shape of the moment before it became the past. Yes, she said. It came out before the 3rd second was finished. He breathed, something in him changed that she had never seen before, a change that was like the change in a room when a window is finally opened, the air shifting, the quality of the space becoming different. She had never seen him be relieved. She had not known that was what his face looked like when it happened. It was, she thought, remarkable. That was quick, he said. I have had 3 years of the alternative, she said. I know what I want. He was quiet for a moment. Then he did reach across the table, and his hand came to rest over hers, not a grasp but a placement, his palm warm over her knuckles, the contact straightforward and clean, and without any of the performance that she had always feared would accompany something like this. It was simply a hand, on hers it stayed there. She looked at it. Your solicitor, she said. Yes. Cora thinks I don't know, she said, that she told you about me. He was quiet. She told me that you thought I had been in love with you since I was 19, she said. She told me in the most careful way she knew how, which was to say it approximately 3 times in different conversations and wait for me to react. When did she tell you? 2 months ago, she looked at him. I told her she was imagining things. And was she? No, she said. She was correct in every particular. I was simply not ready to have it be a fact that anyone else held. He looked at her with the expression she now understood was his version of warmth, which was not decorative warmth or performed warmth, but the quiet fundamental kind, the kind that simply is. She is going to be insufferable about this, he said. Completely insufferable, Elara agreed. We should let her. She has earned it, he said, and something broke open in his face then finally all the way. A proper laugh, a real one, the laugh of a man who has just put down something that was heavy and found that his arms were lighter than he remembered. She had never heard him laugh like that. She thought she would like to hear it again. They ate the rest of the dinner slowly, because neither of them was in any hurry, because there was nowhere else either of them needed to be, because 3 years of being very careful in opposite directions had ended, and the world on the other side of that care was the same world with different air in it. He walked her home afterward. The evening had gone cool. The streets were the usual London streets, not quiet, never entirely quiet but manageable, the nighttime noise of a city that did not stop but did slow. At her door he held her hand briefly and said good night. She said good night. He left. She watched him go until the corner took him. She went inside. She went upstairs. She changed her clothes and brushed her hair and sat at the window for a while in the way she often did, looking at the city. She was not counting anything. She was not managing anything. She was simply sitting with the full and unguarded weight of a night that had gone exactly as it had gone, and finding, to her own considerable surprise, that unguarded was not as difficult as she had spent 3 years fearing it would be. The borrowed pearls were on the dressing table. She looked at them. They were plain and small and slightly too tight, and she had worn them every time she had been trying to be something she needed to be, every time she had borrowed someone else's idea of composed. She picked them up, held them for a moment, set them back down. She would not need them on Thursday. She had already decided what she would wear on Thursday, something she had chosen herself without borrowing, without adjusting. She would wear her own things. They fit better anyway. Always had. She had simply taken a while to understand that. Outside, the city went on, the night went on. The long particular London spring that had held all of it, the ballrooms and the garden parties and the Tuesday breakfasts and the quiet corners of other people's libraries, moved forward toward summer, and Alara Voss sat at her window in the dark and thought about old maps and guessed at coastlines and the world before anyone had agreed on the shapes of things. She thought about what it meant to draw your best map from the information you had and go forward with it. She thought about what it meant to have, finally, better information. Then she went to bed and slept, and did not wake until morning, and the morning was ordinary and warm and entirely, completely hers.